See a big sign at the side of the road. It means 15 miles to the Love Shack. Love Shack, baby. Love Shack, baby. I got me a Chrysler. It's as big as a whale, and it's about to set sail. I got me a Chrysler. It seats about 20, so come along and bring your jukebox money. The Love Shack is a little known place where we can get together. Love Shack, baby. Love Shack, baby. The sign says, stay away, fools, 'cause love rules at the Love Shack. All right, we're live. Wait for some people to filter in here. If you see a big sign, the sign. The sign says, stay away, fools, 'cause love rules at the Love Shack. Around and around and around and around. And everybody's grooving, baby. Folks lining up outside just to get down. Funky little shack. Funky little shack. Okay, so today we're going to finish. We're going to do chapter 9 of this book. Talking chapter 9. Chapter 9, which is titled Hiding in Plain Sight, the Indigenous Origins of Social Housing and Democracy in the Americas. Gotta say, right off the bat, that hits the ear bad, because origins implies a continuity, right? And I just don't think that you can draw any continuity between whatever the hell he's talking about in this chapter and modern schemes of social housing. And I think that's a general problem with the entire, frankly, the entire project here, is attempting to imagine a continuous chain of influence reaching from these modern. I'm trying to think. Like it's a prehistorical. Not really. They have writing. Some of them do anyway, but certainly not a lot of writing. But like these things and modern notions of liberty and freedom, because he's trying to argue that that rather than emerging from a process of modernization, that ideas that we think of as modern ideas of liberty and justice and whatnot and freedom have their basis in these early human settlements. Pre-Columbian, I guess that works too. And as I said, I don't know if that's really the case. A lot of it ended up hinging on his whole deal with, Europe, the Enlightenment being kindled by this interaction with indigenous cultures in North America. And it does seem like he's they're getting to making that argument that there's like this circular transmission whereby, icky, hierarchical property relations erupt in Eurasia, and then, in the New World, in the Americas, these traditions of autonomy and democracy have survived, and that when they interact with one another, that's what causes European civilization to start to look inward and ask questions about what it really values. And honestly, even if it's true, I don't know what you do with the fact that they just got fucking owned. They got owned so fucking bad. All of these traditions that they seek to point out, at some point in history, get just steamrolled permanently with no recovery. And I have to believe that has implications that they just don't want to seem to really dwell on, because it challenges the idea that we're all really just like a mind set, a phase shift in mental, framing away from just recreating these social or organizational structures in the wreckage of modernity that we're living in. So in this chapter, Grabgrow, after talking about early democratic or quasi-democratic governing structures in urban areas in Eurasia, moved to Mesoamerica, specifically into the Central America and Yucatan Peninsula area, where, of course, which are ruled by the 16th century, 14th century, 15th century by the Aztecs, which were then, of course, overthrown by the Spanish. But what Grabgrow want to point out is that before the hegemony of the Aztec Empire, which is, of course, a very brutal hierarchical social structure that involved, slavery and mass fucking human sacrifice. There were other models of social relationships in that area, and specifically, the Aztecs themselves were inspired in the construction of their capital of Tenochtitlan by a abandoned, at that point, the time they were moving through the Mexa Valley there. A city that the Aztecs referred to as the city of the gods, because it had these monumental architectural structures, but was totally abandoned, called Teotihuacan. I believe that's it. Teotihuacan. I'll go with Teotihuacan. That'll work. Which was inhabited, estimated from 100 BC to 600 AD. So you got a good 700-year period where you have this area is settled in a urban space, and it's a very weird site. So it defies a lot of archaeological expectations, because it has some, as I said, monumental architecture. It's got two huge pyramids, the Pyramid of the Sun, what the Aztecs called it, and the Pyramid of the Moon. And it's got a big open plaza with that fronted a temple to the feathered serpent. Mesoamericans, they love the feathered serpents, big on those. But it also has this weird layout of like apartment blocks, basically, all around it, with no signs of, the sort of social stratification that you see in other early urban settlements. And Grabgrow point out that this seeming perplexity is sort of resolved if you look at the structure chronologically. The first thing to be built, the first thing that lasts, that be built anyway, were these fucking giant structures, the pyramids and the temple. But at a point in the history of the city, the temple was raided, smashed, the idols were destroyed. They did a Saddam Hussein pull down of the feathered serpent statues. And after that, you see this explosion in social housing, basically, where they start building these relatively even-sized apartment complexes, like one floor story apartment complexes with like hundreds of people in one, what you'd call a neighborhood, which were all decorated at different, like what Grab referred to as psychedelic murals. And you see in these areas no signs of kingdom or ruledom. The images of people, everyone's the same size, which is very rare. Usually you'll see one big guy to represent, the god and then the king that the god speaks through. Here, everybody's the same size. Essentially, everyone is vibing in the block. And Grab paint this narrative where you had a classic human sacrifice-based, because this is another thing that you see as evidence of human sacrifice, bodies being, people being decapitated and their bodies being sort of arranged in patterns in the, again, the foundation of buildings, that kind of thing. And that stops the same time that the temple gets destroyed, and doesn't happen anymore once this move towards social housing building has happened. And the picture that they tell is one where you have this classical civilization of brutal hierarchy and ritualized domination, overthrown from within, and literally the gods being pulled from their fucking from their platforms and smashed. And that in the wreckage of that, the people democratically coming together to provide for each other collectively by building this structures of social housing, which, while they were roughly the same size, were not exactly the same size, and all of which were decorated in distinct ways and involved plenty of diversity, not just in styles, but also ethnicity. They say that there were quarters here for people from different tribes in different parts of Mexico and Central America. And this is where I really felt, from when I was a young anarchist, I felt a real tingle as I remember reading about other moments in time like this that you can kind of freeze and then texture and create a vision of an alternative human potential. And they're with this description, they're filling in a lot of fucking gaps with what they want there to have been, right? Because they don't fucking know. It's a persuasive collection of evidence, but that's because they're collecting it. It might be very much less persuasive being collected by somebody else with different priors. But anyway, you do have the reality of this very unusual social housing, and you have the reality of the destruction of this temple complex. So you have every tool at your disposal to build this story of a period, a little idyll where people were able to organize themselves, did not need gods or masters, and were able to provide for each other collectively, which is, the dream of all of the entire left in any respect. This is, if not the teleology, an end stage, it is the possibility, the potentiality that moves you forward. Because if you can see it in your mind, if you can imagine it really happening, and especially if you can animate a period of history, even if it's a moment, with those values, a time when those values governed and did do the things that reactionary social culture tells you, reactionary social assumptions tell you cannot happen, it keeps you focused. It sharpens and directs your political action, because what else is to be sought but that, in my view? Any of the schemes of natural hierarchy of the right all end in obliteration. They have to. And all they end up doing is romanticizing that annihilation and obliteration, that death drive, and finding some apotheosis in it. But, it's sick. It's a sickness unto death, and it's not worth It's not worth trying to preserve or defend or validate, But at the same time, it strikes me of how much of yourself and how much of your desire of how you want things to be inflects this. Because I remember reading about the Spanish Civil War, when I was like in my early 20s, and reading about the July days when everyone knew in the city that the soldiers were going to come out of their barracks, and they spontaneously organized to resist them. And you had cab drivers welding sheet metal to the side of their cabs to make them into improvised armored cars. And you had athletes who were in Barcelona for a socialist alternative to the Olympics in Munich, which many left-wing athletes had boycotted, just grabbing guns and going out into the barricades. And then when, sure enough, that next morning they came out of their barracks, they got fucking owned. And then, of course, the collectivization of agriculture in the Catalonian and Andalusian countryside. Not a Stalin-esque nightmare, but a spontaneous expression of rural solidarity. You go to a village. The story of going to a village in revolutionary Spain. There's that has abolished money and abolished the value form. And there's a poster that says John Rockefeller could come in here to this city and he wouldn't be able to buy a single cup of coffee. You read about that, and it gives you, yes, a sense of what could be, and a desire to put some effort into making it happen. What's going on? What happened? Why? Can you not see me? Can you not hear me? What's going on? It's normal? You can't do that to me, people. Okay. But at the same time, as fun as it is to read, and as important as it is, just from a morale and spiritual perspective, at the end of the day, though, what's it got to do with the price of beans? Like, how does any of this How does any of this relate to the question of organizing towards power in the time that we live in? A time when all of these possibilities have been wiped out, and a totalizing capitalism, a totalizing regime of technological alienation has defined human existence in a way that makes us as beings metaphysically distinct from the beings that are being described in this book. And that's a question that I don't think that there's a lot of answers to that come, in this literature. So Greg wrote talk a lot about this city and how it very well might have been this little island of mutualism in a sea of burgeoning like death cults and murder empires. They also point out the weird phenomenon of people from this city, Teotihuacans, becoming like stranger kings in areas to the south of the city, suggesting that if you wanted to be a king, if you wanted to rule over others, you essentially couldn't do it in the city, and you had to go somewhere else. You were like an adventurer, a vagabond, or a merchant. You very well might take the skills of governing and asserting authority and asserting power that you learned in the democratic tumult of the city, and apply it to polities that expected hierarchy and expected, and in fact could not function without like monarchical domination. And then the second half of the chapter is actually funny in a way, because the entire thing is a argument that the God damn it, I gotta say, they're the toughest languages for me are the Mesoamerican ones. The Tlaxcala, the guys who helped Cortez, the tribe who, when Cortez showed up with his vagabond band of Spaniards, fought him a number of times, kept getting killed, and then decided to ally with him to overthrow the Aztecs. I know you can write it. That doesn't help me. I can read the writing. It doesn't tell me how to say it. I'm literally looking at the word here. This does not help, having it written here. It's spelled the same way. It's not a spelling issue. It's a pronunciation issue. So the whole gist of this, the second half of this chapter, is Grabgrow making an argument that rather than being overawed by the power of the Spaniards or supernaturally suborned by a belief that they were gods or something that is like often assumed to be the case, that this tribe decided collectively and democratically to ally with Cortez, and they point out that we have records, from only a few generations later, describing the deliberations that went on among a people who were fundamentally governed by democratic means, similar in most respects, at least described to Europeans in a way that they recognized as like classic Athenian democracy. And it is kind of funny that in this book that's supposed to be lauding the virtues of democratic deliberation, that the one example we have so far of a decision that has come to democratically, as opposed to a process that might bring about democratic decisions, is the decision to ally with the Spaniards to essentially destroy pre-Columbian Mexican civilization. That's pretty funny. Mexico? Tlaxcala? All right, I'm going to avoid saying it. That's the way I'm going to get around this. Like their whole thing is like, look, these guys, they didn't have a king. They weren't odd. They were self-contained democratic agents who came together in a spirit of equality to come to democratic conclusions about questions of state. They didn't have anybody tell them what to do, and in that process, they decided to help literal demons, like monsters. Pretty funny. And it does raise some questions, about like, I mean, at the end of the day, what is the benefit of this democratic model? Is it the outcomes it comes to? Or is it that even if you make bad decisions that way, they're decisions that are broadly understood to have been collectively made, and therefore we can deal with the outcome of bad decisions because we're not riven against one of ourselves the way we are, in our fake democracies, where things keep getting worse. And even though we have democratic systems, allegedly, and a democratic voice, we never feel like we have anything to say about why things happen. And so therefore, we have to search for scapegoats and places to sublimate our impotence and just slowly and steadily just termite-like destroy the internal cultural support structures for democracy. So this part of the chapter, Grab Grow, they describe how this civilization carried out a public political deliberative process, had a political class, people who stood for public office, but were essentially hazed into it, so that it would discourage the glory seekers and the prima donnas and the cynics and frauds and the sophists from trying to claim power, because you'd had to really want to do it for its own sake to put up with the public ritual humiliation that politicians were required to go through. And honestly, I gotta say, that is a good idea that should come back. There should be real, penitential trials that you should have to go through in order to make any attempt to claim governing authority on behalf of anyone else. And this is honestly why I really do think that elections in general are wildly overrated. And I think that a truly functioning democratic polity that, of course, had abolished class rule, this is the important thing, would not have elections. Because elections are what you do to mask class rule. Elections are a ritual you perform to validate class rule and to confirm its power over the land and its necessity. I think if it was abolished, if there was not that constant conflict and tension within each person and between each person that is generated by class rule, that you would not need fucking stupid ass elections. You'd have any position that is technical would be done by someone who had technical expertise in it. And any questions where you just basically need somebody to function as a decision point, like in an algorithm, you need somebody to say yes or no to a question. Sortion, baby. Pick names out of a fucking hat. Lottery. So he says, though imagine the selective pressures hazing our political caste would produce today. Marjorie Taylor Greene would end up God Queen. I don't think so. I guess it means what you mean by hazing. I don't mean like people saying, apparently for the Teotihuacans, they would get politicians out in public and everyone would just insult them and scream at them and call them bad names and basically read them for filth, as the kids say. But that would not work now. That's not an effective hazing now when any attention is like fucking gamma radiation to the Hulk. It would have to be unpleasant. It would have to be something that a pleasure seeker, a glory hound would not want to experience. And the thing that combines basically everybody in our political class now is that they are all doing it because they think it's a good time. They think it's fun, and they think that it's validating. Did you guys know about how both MGT, I don't know about MGT, but I know that Lauren Boebert and Candace Owen and a bunch of other right-wing politicians and influencers all signed up for one of those scam mall modeling agency companies that promises to get you work in modeling if you pay them for headshots or something, only for actors. They all just want to be they want to be famous. They want to be actors, but they don't have the talent or the looks to do it. Politics is a cheat code. I can tell you, I was able to carve out a career in the, quote, entertainment industry, broadly pursued, because I didn't have to rely on my, comedic abilities or my intellectual bona fides. I was able to ride the wave of a interest in politics and articulate a political perspective. And that does so much of the work that would otherwise have to be done by the luck of your birth and then, residually your talent. And so these people, they all went through the back door. They went through the fucking, the Sally port. Because why wouldn't you? And if you made politics actually unpleasant in some respect for these fucking people who are, like the rest of us, just lobotomized by our most basely implanted instincts towards pleasure, they would flee. They would be horrified. I mean, I don't know what it would have to be, though. Like I said, insulting them wouldn't work. They love that. It's attention. Maybe that's it. They would have to go like a year without social media or like public appearance before they could apply to run for anything. Can you imagine one of these people doing that? Can you imagine one of these people not telling everybody what they fucking think every moment of every day for even a day, let alone a year? But I gotta say though, when it comes to this description of the Tlaloc Allah, I can't accept fully the grab grow argument about them because they're honestly too sketchy about the political economy of their civilization. Like they talk about how they have these democratic assemblies and stuff, but as they point out, the thing this reminded Europeans of was Athenian democracy, which of course we know was only possible because of fucking slavery. Now we know that these the Tlacans were basically the only unsubjugated tribe in this area that was not under some sort of colonial relationship to the Aztecs, and in fact had to carry out like ritual warfare with the Aztecs, where they essentially had to sacrifice a number of their warriors every year to their dark rituals in Teotihuacan. And according to the Aztecs, of course, that's why they were free. It's because they were essentially like free-range chickens. Like it was easier. They were essentially part of the Aztec polity, but it was much less of a hassle to just let them do their own thing, and then whenever you needed to, go in and pluck out some warriors that you need because the thing runs on human blood, literally. And of course, that suggests that since these are, people who would define themselves in opposition to Aztec culture, very well might eschew all elements of Aztec domination. And I think this gets to an important thing that Grabgrow point out throughout this book, is that these models of egalitarianism do not spring up out of nowhere. They don't spring up from nature because they're very clear that they don't think there is a egalitarian state of nature in early humanity. I would disagree. I mean, at a certain point it breaks down, but I do think you don't get tribal human society without enforced egalitarianism at some point, especially for the simple fact that anything else cannot be enforced, really, because of the ability of anybody to fucking move and leave. The inability to enforce any kind of, like, real authority over anybody else. But anyway, their argument is that these models of egalitarianism emerge due to contact with hierarchical structures. Society is emerging, deifying warriors and creating hierarchies and ritually reaffirming them through violence. And those who are disaffected by that life flee to the margins and then reconstruct a social order that defines itself in opposition to all of those things. Because as outsiders, they see the repellent features that are laundered by the cultural skein, the rituals that sanctify it. Or sometimes you have the opposite. Like in the last chapter, they talk about how early egalitarian urban centers in Mesopotamia had little warrior kingdoms sprout out in their periphery, where you have the opposite thing happening. People repulsed by the effeteness and lack of martial vigor among settled people sitting in their, giant warehouse temples, writing in cuneiform about how many, vials of olive oil or fucking mud or whatever are going to go from one place to another, and not out there, red in tooth and claw. That other thing that is, part of the human animal, the need to seek and dominate and hunt, that needs to be synthesized into a settled relationship to the world around you. But the form that takes varies greatly on who you grew up around. And so their model for how egalitarian structures are created and sustained essentially requires this dialectical relationship with other power structures, other political economies. Problem is now, though, where we live, there is no alternative. There's no space anywhere else. There's nowhere outside. Yet, anyway. I think the one thing, I think by the end of this book, one thing that I think I'm going to agree with GrabGrow here is that if we're going to build alternatives to this death spiraling capitalism, it's going to be in geographic, temporally fixed places outside of it. And of course, the bad news, though, is that the places that are going to be outside of it are only going to be outside of it because of a tactical retreat by capitalism, a decision to cut off the limb, like somebody with diabetes sawing off their feet, and creating essentially post-apocalyptic landscapes. And if anything is going to emerge contrary to this, it's going to be there. The problem is that it's going to be all those places, the people in them, the people who will be in them, are people who have still have been shaped by the conflicts and the categories of that global capitalism. And that's a challenge. And it's going to have to be resolved. And the thing that will resolve it, I think, like at the truest level, will just be the will towards survival. Because some people are going to come to the realization that cooperation in such a context is the only real way to secure survival. And that alternative to capitalism might never have anything to do with the destruction of capitalism, the overthrowing of capitalism, which would collapse from within through its own contradictions. Until the entire globe is, this massive junkyard covered with people sifting through wreckage and trying to build things out of it. And then, a couple of people, a couple of dead bodies with Ethernet cords jammed in the back of their heads because they thought they were downloading their consciousness into a fucking MacBook. And then one factory left that just keeps perfecting and releasing synthetic versions of a spicy, crispy chicken sandwich. Because if you look at capitalism right now, the only place where you see any innovation or any move towards the sort of competitive, winnowing towards perfection that we're supposed to get out of the competitive capitalist economy is in treats, and honestly, specifically, spicy chicken sandwiches. There's so many different ones. There's so many ones you can try. So it really does feel like this is a machine designed to make chicken sandwiches. Not to sustain people nutritionally. No. Just to make the chicken sandwiches. So yeah, you know, a situation where the last people left are these Muskite freaks who walled themselves off from humanity and tried to merge with their computers before, you know, a dog came along and gnawed the fucking plug out of the wall or whatever. And then they just burp. And then just the last expressions of the machine algorithm, which has never been able to get beyond the profit motive and the consumer society that it is premised on. And you're just shooting out spicy chicken sandwiches. Well, the people left try to scratch something new out of it. And the thing is, to me, that's enough hope to keep going. That's enough hope to obviate any argument about what's the point. Because obviously, if you're alive and keep living, you don't really believe that. You just have decided to ascribe to the most narrowly selfish idea of why. You know, pile up pleasurable experiences, basically. Of course, you know, that doesn't work, and it destabilizes over time, and you have to, you know, keep going more extreme in order to get the same experience. But, you know, for most people, if they're in their, you know, early adulthood, they're not anywhere near that. You know, they're still very much able to scrape together enough dopamine to keep going. But, you know, maybe there's more. And to me, the fact that, you know, there are always going to be people, they're always going to be trying to live, and the grinding gears of material history are going to continually disrupt their relationship to their environment in such a way that settled delusions, settled malpractices, social malpractices cannot be sustained, and they will eventually be destroyed. Without any revolution. Like, that's the thing. You don't have to, yeah, like, there is no revolutionary context in the current moment. We don't have revolutionary subjects because the working class is no longer a subject of history as it was in the 20th century. That means that someone else, some other human formation is going to have to do that work of cobbling all this shit together, of taking the technological capacity that we've accumulated, which is the real legacy of, you know, that building of forces of production is technological capacity, and wielding it collectively in dialogue with the natural world, rather than in sort of a ritualized denial of its existence. Okay, so that's that chapter. Kind of a short one. Self-contained. The next chapter for next week, probably Friday, maybe Thursday, we'll see, is, I think this is going to be a spicy and interesting one. Chapter 10, Why the State Has No Origin. The Humble Beginnings of Sovereignty, Bureaucracy, and Politics. Now we're going to, I think, finally get to Grabgrow making an actual argument for, well, all right, if agriculture didn't cause human hierarchical social relations and property relations, and urban life didn't do it, if both those things are compatible with democracy in a real sense, well, then where the fuck did it go? Why did kings take over? So this will be interesting. Because I think now we're finally going to get to a claim we can sink our teeth into. Dawn of Everything by Grab-Grow is the book, for those asking. Chapter 10 for next week. History is happening is the thing, folks. And when history is happening, all of the rosary worrying theoretical shit that you spend your time with kind of goes away. And the question becomes vital. The problem is that if you're relatively, like as we said, history is happening, but of course not evenly, not equally distributed. The waves are buckling through the thing, but they're being felt to different intensities in different places. So, like, we can feel the wave coming, but what do we do with ourselves? Not in an abstract sense, because that can never lead to anything. That can always just be avoidance, really, of the question, because there's nothing we can do at that level. But we have to do something every day of our goddamn lives, and we're all in awareness that our relationship to our material world is not stable. And that means we have to act. But the more we phrase this in, well, what can I do politically to change the trajectory of this? I mean, that is really an abdication. And I'll admit completely that, like, that's why I care. I pay attention to politics, certainly. That's why my gaze first cast itself to the political level when I was unsatisfied with my life. And the trajectory of everyone's life, as I could see it, was, well, who can I vote for? Or, what door can I knock on to make this change good? I think what we've found is that while we can still act on that level, we can vote, we can knock on doors, we can do that, we sure as shit should not devote too much time intellectually, or especially, and even more importantly, emotionally to it, because the real questions are closer to home. But the answers are close to home too, which means that talking about this level of praxis is very difficult in the social media realm, because, as I've said before, like, you're constrained. You can't talk about political action that might be, like, meaningful, like, forget if it's going to actually do anything, existentially meaningful in a way that voting and rooting for a party just can't be, because it's not fucking legal. And even the stuff that is political, like elections and who to support and what door to knock on, the ones that matter are happening at the local level, at the very grassroots level, which means discussion of them in the social media realm will always be flattened to be about questions that are not applicable. Generalized concepts and abstractions that have nothing to do with the questions that the people actually working on this specific campaign or what have you have to answer. Like the Amazon workers who organized their Staten Island facility, like what they pointed to when describing, like, where they got their ideas for how to organize and where they got, where they found their priorities, it was not online. It was fucking William Foster's organizing in the steel sector from the 1930s. Because you got a bunch of people at a fucking a warehouse, essentially a modern-day logistical factory, who aren't allowed to go to the bathroom and can't pick when they work. If you're outside of that process, if you're a politically engaged person on the internet, how are you supposed to intervene in those questions? You're not having to not go to the bathroom. You're not having your work determined by others in that specific way. The only thing you can bring to the question are abstractions, are ideas of like abstract principles. Like I see after the Amazon announcement, after the vote, people were like, I can't wait for them to be anti-imperialist, you know? It's like, they very well might end up, you know, radicalized into you know, a anti-imperialist praxis where they're like doing solidarity strikes with, you know, people in other countries and stuff. They might have that happen, but it'll only be after they get fucking bathroom breaks, for Christ's sake. If you start with anti-imperialism, which is what a lot of people want to do because they tell themselves it's the most important thing, and in one sense it is, but in terms of an individual American citizen's ability to affect it, the least important thing, which is why it's so fixated and fetishized by some. Because they have no responsibility over it. Because there's nothing they can do about it, really. What's going to determine if they decide to do anti-imperialism is not going to be that enough of them read a post about it or saw a meme. It'll be because of other conditions occurring. It'll be because of material conditions changing and radicalization occurring in other sectors that they then would connect to. And I honestly see a situation where an Amazon union decides, you know what, it's worth it. It's worth challenging the law and our bosses and risking what we have and the gains we have made through collective bargaining to make this international stand. I can see them making that decision, but it would be because of conditions that I cannot imagine or anticipate. Conditions created by the rapid deterioration and transformation of material conditions. And then people might apply some stuff they saw in the ether to the question, but what's going to decide their answer is not going to be theoretical. It's going to be their recognized self-interest, whether or not they adhere it to other people in other lands. And I can see that happening because the thing that prevents it from happening is faith that this order can provide something. And that faith is being dissolved before our very fucking eyes. What do you think everybody going absolute feral means? I mean, yes, it's not because we don't have politics, it's nihilistic. But it speaks to a greater lack of any faith in any institution. And that means that, like, the calculus that buys off labor traditionally in the United States also changes. Because, like, the context where business unionism overtook the American labor movement. I mean, obviously you have, you know, the state jihad of the second Red Scare that, like, actually put a social and professional cost to adhering to, you know, radicalism that didn't exist during the Popular Front era of World War I or World War II. But also the fact that this American state, this, you know, capitalist behemoth that, yes, had collapsed under its own contradictions in the 20s, in the late 20s, early 30s, had risen like a fucking phoenix and provided a vision of utopian horizons. Of course, for white workers, that goes without saying, but I guess you still got to say it. and that had a huge impact. But that's, I would say that if you want to understand why our political tribe, our political class is so manifestly incompetent, like at their jobs, like they're doing a bad job of their jobs, in addition to being corrupt and doing, because the state does have an interest in maintaining some leverage vis-a-vis private industry, because from the long term, the state is necessary for both. So it is in the best interest of the state to provide a certain degree of functionality. But it does not. And one of the big reasons is that even the most sincere people in governance have not and cannot process the real implications of declining living standards over the last 40 years. Because they came into politics, all of them, because they're all a million years old, in the and their understanding of political institutions, where political authority is derived, all of the propagandized ideological stuff, the infrastructure of their mental world that define things like their self-interest, their understanding of their relationship to their country and their party and the governing structures and the state, were defined by that post-war bonanza. And they, of course, because they have only gone up and up and up, still have the same relationship to those institutions that they did when they were younger. But that an entire generation is now coming along, has now lived where those systems of legitimacy, patterns of rituals of legitimation, have just been drained of everything. I mean, they really did cut the copper wiring out of the building. And they don't know that, and they can't know that. They cannot process it. And that's why the Democrats are just watching as the Republican Party coalesces into this counter, this hostile internal regime that has fully assimilated the corruption and insufficiency and worthlessness of our institutions, and is fully willing to abolish them, and has not done anything, even though it is absolutely in their power to minimize the worst of their, designs on the institutions. Because they think everybody sees these things, these structures, these rules, these symbols, and sees them as legitimate, because they see them as legitimate. And the asymmetry, in part, comes from the fact that, yes, most Republicans, and certainly political class Republicans, are rich, just like Democrats are, and have benefited from, the imperial state at its apogee, and are still hanging around on the fat of it, even as it's declining. So they shouldn't be alienated materially from the modern state. But they have been systematically alienated from it culturally, in a way liberals aren't. So they feel like they're losing, even though they've been winning their whole lives. Because in order to stabilize itself, in order to integrate the new demographics of capitalism that needed to be brought into its system, the new consumers that needed to be appealed to, capitalism had to adopt a formal structure of tolerance, a culture of tolerance, which pleases liberals to death. Liberal elites, these Arminians, these little these little descendants of pilgrims, these little freaky Calvinists who need to believe themselves to be good people, to believe themselves to be worthy of election. And for what good people means acting with charity in the world and acceptance and all these good values in the world. They've been working, overtime for this for the last 60 years, and so they're happy to see it, and they're cheering it on. And that's why, since they're not materially or culturally alienated from the culture and its superstructures, they still think that everybody around them has the same reverence for their institutions. Meanwhile, through the looking glass, the reactionary right ruling class, the old line Puritans, the true Calvinists, the ones who executed John Oberfeld, or whatever the fuck his name was, in 1860 or in 28, 21, I think 21, right before the 12-year truce was ended in the Netherlands. Who believe that you are elect because you are elect, and that therefore hierarchies are naturally created, therefore God inspired, have been steadily alienated from the cultural space for the last 40, 50 years. And so, in alliance with people farther down on the totem pole than them, who are both culturally and materially alienated from the system, they will do their best to knock it down. All right, I think that's enough for today. Next week, as I said, chapter 10. People are doing a bit when you're asking what the name of the book is. Dawn of Everything. But why are they alienated? Don't they have it all? Everyone in a class society is subject to a fundamental alienation, like a split within the self. Because we relate to strangers through a veil of either, and not either or, in a combination of both, resentment and pity, guilt, basically. We are uneasy with our fellow man and can't be otherwise because we look him in the eye and we know. And we either know that we toil for their benefit or they toil for ours. And that psychic break has to be soothed somehow, distracted from, rationalized. And our cultural rituals seek to rationalize them and affirm them and validate them. But it doesn't go away. And all of the travails we go through life happen in this context. And the pain that we feel, the resentment, the alienation that is like processed otherwise, through interpersonal lens, all is also being reflected through this prism as well. And so even the people at the very top of the totem pole are fundamentally miserable and alienated. They'll tell you themselves how unhappy they are. It's just a question of where they put that unhappiness. Rich liberal people are going to put it at themselves. That's why they're all in therapy. That's why they're all fixated on perfecting the self through acts of charity, yes, and political virtue, but also self-cleansing and healing and fucking yoga and unguents. Goop exists for these people. And so they try to purify themselves of the thing that they feel, that fundamental breach. Conservatives, the right, reactionaries, blame the other, the outsider. and seek to punish them and subjugate them for this feeling. At least the ones who do politics, that's what their politics psychologically is powered by. Of course, what it's really powered by is their self-interest, which is, of course, all this stuff, but tied to the maintenance of their material position, which is what they seek first and foremost to protect. And here's the thing, and here's the reason that, so here's the situation. You've got these two halves of a ruling class, right? And they're both operating out of these completely distinct reality worlds. And so this is a clash of ideas, right? And when we see politics, it is this idealist clash. But what is happening? Well, they're legislating and speculate. Well, people are legislating and debating and organizing along these camps. They're also seeing to their material interests. And while the cultural stuff they do is in conflict, and in fact that conflict defines politics, the stuff they do for their material interests aligns in the same direction at a deep enough level. Like there's sectoral conflict, once again, whoever, has more money, more influence, maybe some better lobbyists win there. But at the baseline level, it's all aligned, and there's nothing there to conflict with it. There's nothing there to challenge it. Working class used to challenge it, and that's why the politics of the 20th century were the way they were. But it's no longer there to provide a challenge, and so it goes unchallenged, and it, as conditions deteriorate, and it cannot adapt to those conditions to secure the legitimacy of the systems, they just get undermined and destroyed. And the people in the political realm fight even harder to try to win, to try to resist the pull towards oblivion, or at the very least punish those responsible. But the whole time, their actions are deepening the hole. And that is why I really do believe that the challenge to this thing will come outside of it. Will come in the realms that have been surrendered to nature by capitalism. And that only in that space where even the technological structures of compulsion are no longer running, can people start building something different. Something that maybe brings together all of the necessary progressive developments, both technologically and culturally and ideologically and conceptually, and brings them together. And the thing that's going to bind it together is going to be some new spiritual conception. I am very convinced of that. What it will be, I don't know. Zen Sunniism? Who knows? A spiritual answer is going to be a cope for material realities. Well, yes, but like if material realities get bad enough that you can't depend on, the supply chain to give you your nutrient slurry, when you have to live on your own, then coping becomes surviving. Coping becomes organizing. Coping becomes living collectively to literally cope with your conditions, i.e. survive them. And perhaps thrive in them. It'll be cool, whatever it is. And it'll probably rule the galaxy in like 10,000 years, 20,000 years. Hell, maybe 100,000 years. You don't want to get ahead of yourself. Hell, sometimes I think it's going to be based in Juche. Because, what polity in the world is best suited to deal with, really, really bad climate change? Say climate change is as bad as your worst predictions of it. And obviously not the thing where we turn into Venus, but where it, fundamentally disrupts all of our, it ends the world as we know it, basically. and everything gets resolved, gets brought down to barbarism. What will be the most resilient polity? How is it not North Korea? I mean, where it is, it's probably not going to get the worst of climate change, right? Pretty far north. It's not like Cuba, God bless Cuba, but they're cooked. They're fucked. North Korea up there, the little armpit, snows. And they've got this, this hermit kingdom up there that under, in a real crisis, I mean, hell, it's not like those people have a lot of, addictions to treats that could, alienate them from everything as real hunger sets in. They've survived horrifying famines before, including in the early 90s. Maybe those emerge as one of the few areas of human organization to sustain itself, to emerge from the equilibrium that eventually is established, and then they hook up with other people who have survived individually, and those other people are able to, interact with the North Koreans, and their ideas are changed by relationship and contact with these new people, but their shared interest in cooperating to survive works through the system and basically does the job of resolving political conflicts. And so then, the human, the synthesized human civilization that does conquer, the biome in the sense of creating a stable, technologically mediated equilibrium with it, then conquers the stars. I don't know. Sometimes I think my money is on cephalopods. It's not even human beings. It's intelligent octopi. But even if it's octopuses, it's still us. Okay. Maybe crows. That would also be cool. All right. Next week with Chapter 10. Bye-bye.